Welcome to Medical Marijuana and Wellness. Today's topic is PTS, post-traumatic stress in medical marijuana, a condition that affects a number of people, not just veterans, but also folks that have any traumatic experience in their life. Joining me today is Manny from Surterra Wellness. Manny, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Manny Alfinez. I'm a store manager at the Pensacola dispensary for Surterra. I'm also a cannabis advisor. Happy to be here to co-host with Marc this on this webinar, and I hope we are able to reach some people and teach some things.
You know, Manny, this is an important subject for a lot of people. I know that you have been generous enough to record a testimonial for us, which I'd like to play in just a moment. But I think this is something that a lot of people should pay attention to because um, identifying and treating PTS can really make a difference in your life.
Absolutely, it completely changed mine around, which you'll be able to see in the testimonial. So I'm happy I was able to oblige.
Great. So let's take a look at your testimonial right now. Well, Manny, thank you very much for joining me for this PTS testimonial. First of all, why don't you let everybody know who you are, and more importantly, I think you're a veteran. Let us know a little bit about your background with the military.
Sure. And thanks for having me, Marc. I've always liked to share my testimony, my story, my background. It gets a little detailed. It does hit home a little bit for some. Might be able to relate to it. So I just err on the side of caution on that one. My name is Marcus Alfinez. My middle name is Manuel, so which is why everybody calls me Manny. I served just under 21 years in the Army, and it's not so much of the post-traumatic stress or symptoms from the Army per se, but it's a lot of things outside of the Army that happened while in the Army, and more of the treatment that came from the Army that made it very difficult. Now, I don't demonize them in saying that because my job wasn't infantry, it wasn't artillery, I wasn't combat arms. I was more on the back end in the electrical communications field, though on the front line supporting them with communications.
Hmm.
But like I said, I was 21 years in, around the 10-year mark. I unfortunately lost a son. My wife and I went through some things on that, and the treatment from the military was pretty dire. And it was more because people didn't know how to handle it. It wasn't because they didn't want to help me. The same thing with the medication. I've seen different people, colleagues or coworkers, brothers and sisters in arms with me who got on medications and it didn't help them. It made it worse. And then it compounded with other medications. So for me, it wasn't so much getting on a medication and helping me. I actually chose not to and kind of bottle it up, if you will, and try to drive on, as we say in the military, which is also indicative from what I've seen of other veterans that we kind of like to make sure that we can truck on and keep it driving and don't ask for help as much. But when we do, we're all in. We bought into that help and we're looking for anything to assist us. So that's kind of what led me, once I retired from the military, into the cannabis industry. I was delivering water for Kentwood Springs when I had my first realization of a dispensary. I delivered water to Surterra, and it caught me off guard. I was really surprised by it, and that kind of was what started turning the wheels for me. I do
Hmm.
have two children, other than the one I lost, and I am married still, thankfully, because of my turn to medicine or medical marijuana. Um, but yeah, I'll sit back a second and wait for some more questions so I could get into more details, see where you want to go.
So let me understand this. You're in the military. You have a traumatic event. Your son. You turn to the military for some help, and really, you're not really. So the way you approached it was to really go to a doctor to really get some medical help, and really to no avail. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was. So that was the first instance. That's when things started taking a turn. That was probably when probably didn't know, but I started on my PTS journey.
Hmm.
Um, they kind of victimized me, thought they were helping me, but victimizing me in the sense that restricting me, too much of oversight, suicide watch, things like that, that kind of put things in my head. At the same time, my wife and I were apart, so things weren't working too well in that aspect. I went not just to physicians, I went to the chaplains, I went through the chain of command. Ultimately, I had to call news outlets and my local representatives in the area to kind of get in and get involved in order for them to see that, hey, this is gonna lose it if we don't get him help. Um,
Sure.
and things got better from there a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, but really didn't. completely address the issue or get it to where you were comfortable
Well,
with it,
that's the
right?
irony. Hindsight being 2020, what I didn't realize then was that I had a problem. I lost a child. I was dealing with some stressors and anxieties and different things. And then when the command did what they did, that became another problem on top of a problem. So what
Hmm.
happened was once word got out and finally they backed off, I looked at that problem being relieved, all my problems being relieved. It was like
Hmm.
I was relieved completely, but that underlying loss of my son was still there, and that didn't
Sure.
resurface for several more years.
And then when did you actually know that when did you actually know that PTS was an issue you had to deal with?
Probably about 3 years before I retired. So around 2015, 2016 is when I really knew. My marriage was going downhill. I wasn't as involved with my kids. Again, the hindsight being 2020. But my wife and I arguing all the time was the clear cut sign. That's when I actually started seeking more help again. And I don't remember the medication they prescribed me. They prescribed me several, but I only tried one. And within a week, it was worse. So I
Hmm.
immediately stopped taking it. And again, I started bottling everything up, started getting very aggressive, started gaining weight. I wasn't good at my physical training anymore. I wasn't in the 300, 250 to 300 marker, which is max. It's more around the 150 to 200. Everything started suffering. And that, I believe, is what concluded to my retirement. I still
Hmm.
have plenty of room to grow. I was on promotion list. But that all subsided. And I was like, well, if I'm not going anywhere, it's time for me to get out, which is also kind of dangerous because then you lose a lot of help that you possibly could have had while you're in. You got to jump through VA hoops. You got to get your disability rating. There's so many different things for a veteran to go through in order to get what I feel they deserve for time served. But yeah, around 2015, 2016 is when I really noticed that I started having PTS issues. And I
Right.
started more therapy and talking. I would talk
Hmm.
to counselors, and that would help me vent and get it out. And I'll last a couple more weeks before I had to talk to them again. But I wouldn't take the medications. I had too many hard stories. I was more fearful of that from my first experience that I was just like, nope, I'd rather just try to truck through it one way or another.
Wow. So why did you turn when did you turn to medical cannabis as an option?
So, like I was saying, when I was doing Kentwood Springs delivery for their water, I walked into Surterra and delivered water. And now I knew about cannabis in different aspects. I kind of did studies before I joined on it. And then while I was in, I was what is considered a unit prevention leader. So we're the
Mhm.
ones that administer drug tests. We go through all that training on different types of drugs and so forth. So when I walked into the dispensary and I saw what was going on, I had heard about these programs going on in the civilian world, but I was active duty, so we don't go near it or touch it or even try to think about it. Um, I tried some things. I went and got my medical marijuana card. It was pretty expensive at that time. I think I paid 300 for the physician visit and around 77, 75 for the state license. That still
Right.
remains the same. Um, Went straight to a dispensary. It wasn't what I expected. Even as a UPL with the military, we're used to just seeing flower, buds. You smoke marijuana. To see it in tincture forms, gels, gummies, and so many different varieties, and high CBD, high THC, different ratio products. It was overwhelming at first. I was lucky enough to deal with some guides or bud tenders, however they were titled at the time, to really guide me in that. And I tried with 1-to-1 ratio products. So I got a little bit of a euphoric effect, but I felt really sick and paranoid at first. My
Mhm.
my background in the military is like, no, this is a bad thing. You shouldn't be doing this. So that
Mhm.
compounded on my anxiety and paranoia.
Sure.
But after about 2 or 3 weeks, that subsided. I started noticing I was better in the sense that I was getting up on time. I wasn't sleeping as much. My kids, who were still young at the time, enjoyed my time. My wife and I were no longer arguing. We were going out and having good times. Now, I would still have setbacks when I was out in public, especially in big crowds and stuff like that, if I heard loud noises, because that was the other part of it. I was in an austere environment before I lost my son. I was there during the Operation Iraqi Freedom Campaign. I've been to Afghanistan. I've been to different areas. So that compounded on it. So anytime I'm in areas where there's loud noises and big crowds, I get a little more anxious. Got to take a little bit more
Sure.
medicine. But around 2018, 2019 is when I made that transition. And mid 2019 is when I really got my life back. I started working again. I didn't think I was after retirement. I started doing things around the house. All my skill sets started coming back to me. My joy for those skill sets, such as carpentry, electrician, not just cannabis as well. Um, so I've been much better, and I think that reflects in my interview today. I hope it does, because it really did change my life around that
Now,
way.
you were using at that point a 1-to-1 tincture. Is that correct?
I was using a one-to-one tincture. There wasn't that many varieties out there, and then I was also using flour mainly at
Mm-hmm.
nighttime. So the one-to-one would get me a little euphoric, but I wouldn't get
Mm-hmm.
high or stoned. But it was just enough to take that edge off and give me a good mood feeling, so I wasn't always thinking about my
Sure.
past. And then at night, it wasn't quite enough to get me to sleep, so I would smoke a joint or something to that effect. Usually, I was actually using pipes
Mm-hmm.
at that time, and that would help me go to sleep. And once I was asleep, it seemed that since I went to sleep in a euphoric state, that my dreams, my post-traumatic nightmares wasn't coming back to me as abundantly or as
Oh, well, that
regularly.
makes a big difference.
Oh, significantly, that sleep made me a better person the
Sure.
next day. And that's around the time when I noticed that if I make myself better, then I'm making everybody else around me better in a sense. I was always concentrating, okay, I'm trash, I'm useless now, I'm a broken tool. Let me just try to help everybody else by lavishing them in my retirement funds, getting them gifts or whatever they need. And that didn't bring happiness. Um, the fact that I was getting better and getting more involved and having good times with my kids, playing baseball and basketball with my son, showing my daughter how to defend herself as she's becoming a 18, 19-year-old young woman. Those are the things that I'm going to remember, that my family's going to remember when I'm gone. Um, Instead of me being slouched over on a couch, just kind of idling by in life. And that's what the one pill that I did take did. It really just duped me down. It masked it. It kind of buried my problems, but the problems were still there. They weren't mitigated. They weren't
Right.
resolved. And that's what cannabis is helping me do. It's helping me realize and come to terms with what my traumas are and trying to understand them better. And even more so, being able to talk like I am now, because then there's feedback, there's conversation, there's dialogue where somebody else might feel something from it and achieve something the same way I might
Sure.
from them as
So, what
well.
would your message be to someone who has come to the realization that they have PTS with respect to looking at medical cannabis as an option?
I definitely do your research. One of the things that I really, really appreciated about it was that there was no overdose. There was no detrimental effect of using cannabis. And I didn't have the problem of trying to wean off certain prescription drugs, which is key if you're on them, to talk to a physician, have that discussion, get them involved with whatever facility you're looking to visit or your source of medicine, and definitely try it. You don't have to worry about getting high. There's so many different products. If you get the right consultation with the right dispensary, and even if you don't, you could go back and ask again and
Sure.
again and again until you feel comfortable. Even though insurances don't play a role in this, it's all out of pocket cost and it's expensive. There is some relief in the sense that you can go anywhere and get whatever you want that's beneficial for you, rather than having to have somebody tell you what to take and hope that it works and then bounce around left and right trying to figure things out. So my advice would be definitely try it, talk to like-minded people, get the right information, because there's a lot of rabbit holes out there. And then go on that journey. There's nothing, it can only go up from where you're at more than likely. And it's always going to be a benefit if you could get back involved with your
Yeah, I
family that
think
way.
it's interesting. You're really mentioning two things that are critical. One is that you're in control, which is really important because
Hmm.
you're listening to your body. Your body's telling you really what works and what doesn't work. We talk about that a lot on the channel, but it's interesting that both of those come to bear. So,
Yeah.
anyway, so any last thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to close out. One of the things that I always like to tell people is definitely take notes, journal things down. It's not like it was, like I said, when I got out of the military and I walked into the dispensary, my breath was taken away. I had no idea there was so many different varieties and ratios and so forth. And one of the things that I didn't do initially was I didn't journal things down. I went based off of the name of products, which is not always conducive, and products do go out of stock. Sometimes they're seasonal, because marijuana is a natural product. It
Right.
is a plant. And they do formulations and stuff. You'll learn if you do get involved, which I highly recommend. But get a journal, find a digital journal. There's apps out there. even if you just write it down on paper, that's always going to be beneficial. And get your loved ones
Sure.
involved. The more people that can be involved and understand how marijuana works for you, the better, because it takes a little training of the mind, or I guess retraining of the mind, that you're not going to get a prescription that says take this at this time at this dosage so long and then come back and visit me. It's really a journey that we have to embark on, and the more people we get involved that can assist us or support us, the
And I
better
think
it
the most
is.
important thing is using cannabis for PTS works. And yeah, you've got
Hmm.
to listen to your body and really fine tune it, but it's something that people should look at as an option. Manny, Manny, thank you
Absolutely.
very much.
It was my honor and my pleasure. Thank you for letting me share my
Appreciate it. Thank
story.
you. So, Manny, that was very fascinating. A lot of folks get confused by the term PTS versus PTSD. Can you kind of clarify that for us?
Absolutely. I was confused myself for a little while. And as you can see on the slide, it has some bullet points on there. But basically, from my perspective, what it was is post traumatic stress is a natural syndrome that pretty much everybody will go through at one point or another. Being able to manage post traumatic stress is the key. When you're not able to manage it, as you heard in my testimonial, I had a breaking point, which was classified as a disorder now because it had a reoccurrence. So, managing post traumatic stress is key before it gets defined as a post traumatic stress disorder where it's unable to be managed without medication or physician intervening.
Right. And when you take a look at managing it with, it was really a condition that the medical facilities tagged PTSD. It's not necessarily that you have a disorder; it's just something that the government is using and medical services are using to be able to classify you. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the way I took it. That's the way I feel about it as well. But again, being able to manage what you go through in life, especially through the times we're going through now, would be key before it's defined as post traumatic stress disorder.
Sure. And I think one of the keys to understanding this is a lot of people that have this particular condition, it's really hard for them to be able to relax. And I think that's one of the things that makes things difficult in this particular area. So, Manny, besides this webinar, there are other resources that you can tap into if you have PTS to be able to get help.
Absolutely. And two that are on the screen are very good ones: Veteran Crisis Line and the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Now, I have used personally the Veterans Crisis Line, and I found it to be quite life changing. It kind of pulled me back from the edge a couple of times from when I wasn't feeling too well and stressed out and anxious. And the people are very sympathetic, if not empathetic. Open up 24 hours, and they are not shy about trying to talk to you and help you out with whatever situation you may be dealing with.
Sure. And that's important. I think the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is also really important as well. Let's talk about something that's really important. We flew, a lot of people look at PTS as a veteran's condition, but candidly, there's a lot of patients. There's a lot of people out there. Here are some of them, Whoopi Goldberg, Mick Jagger, Barbara Streisand, Jacqueline Kennedy. All these folks have also come out and said, we are PTS patients. This is very common. You see this in your practice every day with patients coming into your clinic or into your dispensary. Excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. When people come in, sometimes they don't even realize. Again, we are not medical professionals at dispensaries, but we are subject matter experts in medical marijuana, especially within our dispensary. So when people come to us with their symptoms and their classifications, we kind of hint towards, okay, this sounds like a symptom of PTS or otherwise, like anxiety, depression, stress, or otherwise. And when we tell them that, they're like, oh, yeah, that sounds exactly what I have, which allows us to direct them how to use medical marijuana to treat it.
Sure. And this also contributes to a lot to the anxiety, the stress. Like we mentioned, it's hard for people to relax. It's hard for people to have as close to a normal life, if not a normal life, without being able to, first of all, recognize this and then taking the appropriate steps, which in your particular case, I think you've used medical cannabis to help you with that particular process.
Absolutely. I started off with a very low THC dose, which seems to work very, very well, but it didn't really help with sleep. And then as I experimented with high THC, that helped me with my sleep. So it's not just a one product heal all. You kind of have to journal and figure out what works best with guidance, hopefully, and good dispensary etiquette, and you'll be on your journey to wellness.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. But I think the takeaway from the slide is don't feel bad if you have traumatic stress. You are a lot of people have this particular condition. Most of the people who have it are really go undiagnosed, which is really something that is something I just makes me just bothers me. Let's put it that way, because without being able to identify it and getting the help, they lead a very uncomfortable life without being relaxed.
And usually, just being able to talk to somebody about what stresses you're dealing with will assist with that. It's as simple as that sometimes.
Sure. Now, I do want to point out there's been a lot of studies done, most of which have been done outside the United States on cannabis and PTS. And there's a lot of veterans as well as PTS users that have used medical cannabis and shown that this is an effective treatment. I think in your particular case, Manny, I think you found this to be one of the best options. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I actually steered clear of pharmaceuticals because of what I heard happening. And not to demonize the system, but just the overwhelmness in the veteran system. And when I started using cannabis and I saw what it was doing for other veterans, some of my brothers and sisters, I realized, let me give this a shot. And almost instantaneously, I did a 180.
Yeah, that's great. That's good to know. So it's not just the studies, but also there's a lot of what we call testimonials out there from people that have used it. Now, the question becomes, why does it work? Why is cannabis such a big deal? And I tend to look at cannabis from the standpoint, or this medical marijuana, from the standpoint of looking at how it affects our body. We all know that we have a nervous system. Uh, from the time we were growing up, we knew about this. We knew if we hurt our hand, we hurt our finger, we hurt our knee, we had a particular condition, a signal would be sent to our brain. I tend to look at the nervous system as the cell phone system of our bodies. It gets to our brain and says, Houston, we have a problem. And then Houston does something about that or attempts to do something about that. What's fascinating is for many, many years, um, the scientific community had difficulty understanding how the brain was processing those signals and what they were doing with them. What they found out was when we started studying medical cannabis is that we also have in our body a endocannabinoid system. It parallels and works in conjunction with our nervous system, meaning that when we say, Houston, we have a problem, what it does is it then creates cannabinoids. Your body creates these cannabinoids that really address pain, anxiety, memory, appetite, inflammation, and your immune system. This was a very important discovery that I think really opened the door to a lot of just put it this way, medical options using medical cannabis. Now, Manny, the endocannabinoids in our body are produced naturally. They're being sent by our body through the bloodstream to be able to address any issues you might have. Again, whether that's pain, inflammation, appetite. But the endocannabinoids are interesting because they identically mimic the cannabinoids, and really endocannabinoids are trying to keep you in what they call homeostasis, which is your body in balance. But the endocannabinoids or the phytocannabinoids produced by cannabis are very important. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So phytocannabinoids are produced in the trichome heads of the flower, and they're produced naturally by light, particularly sunlight, or otherwise how we do in controlled grows. We have synthetic lighting with all the spectrum to produce as much phytocannabinoids within that trichome head. And if you look at a plant or the flower material ever in pictures, if you ever have the recommendation to purchase it, you could use a jeweler's loupe or even a magnifying glass, and you'll see those on the flower itself. But what phytocannabinoids do is, as you said, Mark, they mimic our endocannabinoids. So if you have a deficiency in endocannabinoids, you can supplement that with phytocannabinoids. And that's the beauty in using the products, because it's not just smoking the product or vaping the product. We have edibles, we have orals, we have sublinguals, we have topicals, and the body is very receptive to all of them because of our endocannabinoid system.
Yeah, and the question is, why would I need to do this? And I myself, as a senior citizen, my body doesn't produce the endocannabinoids in the quantities and as quickly as it did when I was younger. And if I have a particular condition, which my condition is, I have 7 herniated discs in my neck and 2 in my back from an auto accident. How do I relieve that pain? My body may not be producing enough endocannabinoids to do that. So by being able to supplement or be able to help my body with the phytocannabinoids, what I'm providing the resources that my body needs to be able to address that particular condition. And that's why I can really live pretty much pain free. On a scale from 0 to 10, my pain level is about a 1, which I can live with. So Manny, we've heard about how cannabis can help with PTS. Let's talk about why it works. We talked about the endocannabinoids, but really the key to this is what the endocannabinoids are doing is they're introducing terpenes, and the terpenes are what give you the medical value. You want to tell us a little bit about terpenes, and more importantly, once you identify the ones that are really key, if you're looking at using medical cannabis to identify to manage PTS.
Absolutely. So terpenes is what I like to call the secret sauce of cannabis. And what terpenes do is they give it its flavor, its aroma, and then more importantly, its effect. And there are some key terpenes out there that you want to look out for pertaining to the certain category of product you're using. So you have your indica, sativa, and hybrids, as most people know it, the three categories, but you still have so many different variations within those three categories. So most people like and go to indicas because of the more body effect, relaxing, spasticity, stress relieving, and that's dominant in myrcene and or linalool. Now, myrcene also allows more THC through the blood-brain barrier, getting to the brain and to the spinal cord. So higher THC percentages may not be necessary. I personally look somewhere between 15 to 19% in that area, but then in THC, but terpenes around 1 to 2% would be great.
Sure.
Then you have your sativa category. Those are usually loaded with limonene and or alpha pinene. However, the caveat on this one is most people stay away from sativas because of their anxiety and stress and PTS. But if that's usually because of the limonene and pinene paired up together, those two together kind of create a powerhouse of energy. And if you're not ready to expend that energy, you could get very anxious and very paranoid.
Sure, and I think also pinene also improves short-term memory, which bringing back a lot of those memories isn't necessarily something you want to do if you're a PTS patient.
Absolutely. And that's even though it says relieve stress and anxiety on both of them combined will induce that. And like you said, Mark, that short term memory is not something you may not or you may not be ready to deal with.
Sure.
However, limonene by itself is actually really good, or not by itself, but without alpha pinene is really good for stress, anxiety, paranoia, helps with PTS significantly.
Sure.
And then your hybrids are going to be loaded with caryophyllene typically. Now, caryophyllene is a great terpene because it's the only known terpene so far that reacts with our CB1 and CB2 receptors, just like THC and CBD. Great for pain, natural analgesic. It also works great on the gut. It works in your peripherals, which are your arms, your legs, which is why it's so beneficial as a pain reliever and a stress reliever. And those are dominantly in your hybrids. So those are your top 5 or 6 terpenes I would look out for. And then you also want to look out for temperatures, but we'll get into that a little later.
Well, and that's a good point. We're not going to, we'll dive into that later, but I think it's important to point out that terpenes are very sensitive, and so are cannabinoids, to temperature. And so if you're trying to trigger, let's, for example, the myrcene terpene, here's the temperature range you should be looking for to make sure that you're actually getting the benefit of that particular terpene in the product that you're using. Now let's talk a little bit about the cultivars. Now, people ask, they've heard about strains, they've heard about terpenes. What's a cultivar? A cultivar is a mixture of both the strain and the terpene that's been genetically engineered or put together by the provider to address a particular situation, for example, like PTS. So really, when you talked about your myrcene, limonene, linalool, or terpenoline, alpha pinene, here's some of the cultivars that are out there. You have some comments on this because I think it's important. People come into your location and ask you for a particular strain. What they're really looking for is the relief from the terpenes. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I always tell patients don't or try not to get too hung up on the strain or cultivar because they change from batch to batch. And what one dispensary calls a cultivar and another dispensary calls a cultivar, for instance, White Widows or OG Kush, may not be the same. Just like your favorite dish at a restaurant, let's say Italian food,
Hmm.
spaghetti and meatballs is not the same at one location as it is as another, or pizza for that matter.
Sure.
So when you're asking for a strain, you also want to ask the variation from the last time you purchased that strain so you know that you have the same terpene profile. There's not much variation because keep in mind, terpene profiles account for anywhere between 1 to 8% of the profile, and just a slight 1 to 2% variation in that can significantly affect how it treats your body.
Right. Terpenes don't necessarily have a high percentage of content inside of cannabis, but they're very powerful. And I think that's what the message is here. So what you're looking for when you're looking for relief is mainly the terpene profile, and then you can match that to a particular strain that's available over the counter that's there. So let's also talk about how you take it, because this is an important subject. I know you mentioned in your video you started with sublinguals. You started with the 1-to-1. Is that correct?
That is, and the reason I did that was because I found that I didn't want to smoke marijuana again, particularly since I had quit smoking cigarettes, and I didn't want to vape anything because of liability. I wasn't too keen on what was in that product yet, and I wasn't aware that there were certificates of analysis. So I went for the next best thing that I thought because sublinguals are not rapid onset, but usually within 30 to 45 minutes, if not sooner. And then the duration is usually about 4 to 6 hours. So I wasn't having to step out to vape or smoke every 45 minutes to hour and a half. What I didn't account for was that sublinguals or edibles are also harder to dose because it depends on your diet. It could depend on your environment or time of day. So you have to be very cautious and journal, and cautious in the sense that you don't overdo it because of whatever activities you may be involved in. But
Right.
sublinguals are a great way to go as well.
Yeah, and what you're really mentioning is cannabis love fats. I mean, they love have fatty food in your stomach. It helps them be able to get absorbed and helps them be able to really get the maximum use in your particular body. If you take some lingual drops or edibles on an empty stomach, you won't get as much relief as if you had something in your stomach or ate something prior. Can you comment on that?
Yes. So when that's why you'll also see that sublinguals are usually cut with MCT oil, multi-chain triglyceride, also known as coconut or palm oil or other MCT, chocolates, cookies, usually with fatty content. And I always tell everybody when they're using edibles, orals, or sublinguals to have a small snack in your stomach, cup of yogurt, scoop of ice cream, something like that. Or if you know you're about to have a big meal like lunch or dinner, you want to have it before the meal so that way it absorbs before your meal's absorbed. You don't have to wait too long. But this is more important for when you're going to sleep because you don't want to go to sleep on a full stomach. It's not the healthiest thing to do. So a little small snack will be beneficial, even like a spoon of peanut butter if you could tolerate it,
Sure.
so it attaches. Because if you don't, you'll get the effect, but then you'll wake up in the morning, you'll have your breakfast, and all of a sudden you might feel a second wave, and you're like, oh, what's going on here? And that's the rest of the cannabinoids attaching to that fatty material, getting into your bloodstream and giving you that second wave.
Sure. And as you were mentioning earlier about onset, we mentioned sublinguals. They work between 15 really to 45 minutes and work between 4 to 6 hours. Now, what's interesting about orals or edibles, meaning your gummies, your lozenges, your brownies, cookies, as well as capsules, is they can take anywhere between 15 minutes to 2 hours to work and probably leaning more towards the hour to 2 hours to work. That's one of the things you got to be careful of is, look, a lot of these products that you make are taste great, but really you don't want to eat them like Skittles, because they do have medical cannabis in there, and it can lead to an effect that you may not, or a side effect that you may not like. They're great because they last 4 to 6 hours. They'll help you sleep through the night. For example, I like to take chocolates before I go to bed, but I need to take them an hour, at least an hour or two before I go to bed. This is one of the things about edibles you got to be careful of.
Yeah, I tell people to when it comes to the chocolates or the gummies, chews, or otherwise like that, keep in mind they're partitioned, particularly the chocolates. They're partitioned, so you know how many milligrams you're getting per little partition. Usually 5 to 10 milligrams, depending. And then the chews are not. So the partition for the chews are that they're singular pieces, but they're not homogenized either. So I tell people you don't necessarily want to cut them in half or in quarters, except to trick your mind that you're eating more.
Right.
However, our Iguana chews are homogenized. Those come in 10 milligrams, and you can cut those in half or in quarters and actually microdose your way up. But again,
Right.
I always tell them to do that so you feel like you're eating more because they are so good and you don't want to overdo it.
And you really want to go low and go slow from the standpoint of your of dosing. We'll talk about dosing in a moment, but I think that's really, really important. Again, don't eat these things like Skittles. It's going to be something that you're not going to be. It's not good for you. Let's put it that way, or not going to enjoy it. Let's jump over. I know with PTS, topicals aren't necessarily something that we would be using, but they are an effective treatment.
Yes, so you can use topicals, especially if you're dealing with pain that might spark some of your PTS. If you had an injury that keeps on flaring up, that can easily, like it did for me, flare up my PTS. And then I'll skip right over, if I may, to the transdermal patches because those do actually get into your bloodstream a little bit. They're discreet, and it's literally a micro dose over 7 to 12, maybe 15 hours, depending on your system. And that way you don't have to really feel it. All you know is that you're feeling better. and it's discreet. You don't have to worry about other people finding out. You don't have to step out of work or whatever activity you're doing. So transdermal patches is another way to go as far as a topical.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of transdermal patches because it just helps me, especially if I'm busy during the day or if I'm doing seminars or I'm out, shopping or something like that. I don't have to worry about my medications. I know that I'm getting the dosing that I need because it's microdosing as the day goes long. So I'm very big fan of that. Now let's talk about inhalation because I know some people like smoking, some people don't like smoking. There's a number of folks that say I'd really like to smoke flower. I really like to light up that joint. It's almost therapeutic for me when I roll that joint, put it together, put that blunt. But when you put that 550-degree temperature up to that blunt or that joint, you're burning off almost half of the cannabinoids, most of the terpenes, and most of the flavonoids. So my recommendation, if you're going to use flower, is to use the dry herb vaporizer. What that is a device that you put the cannabis in, and it uses steam to be able to basically set the flower or be able to produce the response that you need from the flower. And you can also set the temperature, meaning that you can then bring out the bright terpene profile. What's your thoughts on that, Manny? Because I think smoking flower, you see a lot of people who want to do that.
Yes, and that's the stigma. Everybody thinks of marijuana and thinks that it's only available through smoking it. That's not the case. I actually use a dry herb vaporizer. I really quite enjoy them.
Mm-hmm.
You get more flavor. It's not too overwhelming. You can do it a couple of cycles before the material is actually completely baked because it's not flamed. It kind of cooks it like an oven and it evaporates off, creating that steam of terpenes and cannabinoids that you're inhaling. The other great benefit to doing that is after the product's done, if you haven't cooked it all the way through, you could use that in your coffee grounds. You could use it as a topping on your ice cream because now it's decarboxylated, meaning that the THCA that was on the flower in the trichomes is now active delta 9 and ready for consumption.
Right. I think that's good advice. Again, we recommend a dry herb vaporizer if you want to smoke. Um, the flower, when you smoke that blunt, you're looking at burnt material that can get into your lungs, which is never good for you. So again, it's your choice as to which way you want to go, but there are options to make it, let's just say, better for your body and a little bit safer. Now, a lot of folks also have used concentrates, not just because they want to be able to get the benefits from cannabis, but really concentrates are where you take and you process that flower into different forms, whether that's wax, shatter, rosins, or resins. But they really also are more cost effective.
They are. However, when you're dealing with PTS, I always say err on the side of caution because you're getting to a very high euphoric state in using concentrates. You're usually at around 500. Some people go higher, though unnecessarily.
Mhm.
And you're reaching THCV, which is usually around 430 degrees, 440 degrees,
Mhm.
which could bring back that short term memory and make you rehash some events of that trauma that you went through. So just be cautious if you're going to concentrate suffering from PTS.
Mhm.
And if you do, I always recommend staying under the 500 mark. There's really nothing beneficial going over that 500 mark, whereas everything will be burnt off as if you're applying the flame, like you said, Mark.
Right.
Um, and then use the proper tools. You don't have to use a torch and a nail. There's other devices out there that are more convenient and safer than using a torch or otherwise.
Sure. I know. I have a Puffco unit that I think is great. Works very well. So,
Yep. And we have those available as well as some other tools at Surterra, and we'll be happy to guide everybody on that as
right.
well.
Now, the other option too is if you don't want to do that, you can take a look at just buying a pen. They're available, the actual inhalation, the actual vape pen at your dispensary. Now, it's important to point out if there's been a lot of bad press about vape pens, but really they're safe, especially here in Florida where you actually test them. Your thoughts on vape pens, Manny?
As I mentioned before, I was hesitant at first because I wasn't aware of certificates of analysis and liability. So every dispensary, including Surterra, we have certificates of analysis available per state regulations. And what a certificate of analysis is, it shows you everything about that flower from seed up until the store to where we're selling it to the individual. No heavy metals, pesticides if it was processed into a concentrate, into a vape. You'll see the terpene content on there as well in order by percentage. Pretty much everything you need to know to feel comfortable that you're using a safe product.
Mhm.
That being said, though, vapes are not meant to be inhaled on like if you were smoking a joint or a water pipe or otherwise. They're meant to be very slow inhalations, about 2 to 5 seconds at the most.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's not going to hurt you, but it could cause irritation, coughing, a very negative experience. And it can also clog up your vape cartridges as well because they're not meant to be drawn on for that long and
Mhm.
heated for too much longer than that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have different ways of being able to take it. The question becomes going back to that terpene profile you were mentioning. I know that I personally, now in my particular case, I'm looking at pain management, inflammation. I kind of stick to this medium range in here because that's where I'm looking for the relief. But you were mentioning the high heats that are over here. Is that correct?
Yes. And typically, when people are using concentrates, what they're looking to get is THCV.
Hmm.
Now, THCV is a much more potent, if you will, version of Delta 9 or THC,
Hmm.
with a much more euphoric effect, though shorter lived. And also, THCV will cancel out the effects of Delta 9 THC, just like CBD will cancel out the effects of Delta 9 THC. I know it sounds very confusing, but that's why it's very important to get that consultation to understand what products you're getting and how to use it to get the most benefit and efficiency.
Sure. And so really what you're looking at is not only, as we mentioned earlier, not just the cannabinoids, but also this is where you trigger a number of the terpenes that you're looking for to be able to address your particular situation.
And as you notice, Mark, there's nothing over 500 degrees on that chart.
Right. Right. And that's really, really important. And that's where you run into trouble if you just put that flame up to your blunt and try to use it. More important than just, or not just, I shouldn't say more important, as important as the terpene profiles and temperature is also the dosing. Really, go low and go slow is the mantra. Um, you've had a lot of experience with this, where people need to be able to just find out what their tolerance is to THC, and once you find it, be able to tune that in. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I was going through my process, again, I started out with tinctures, one to ones, and I started off with a very low dose, around 5 to 10 milligrams. Average dose, by the way, is usually 7 to 12 milligrams. And once I found my sweet spot, almost like drinking, I stopped. It was very hard to stop because I really liked that effect, and I thought the more I would take, the better I would feel. But actually, what happened the first time I did that, I started going down
Hmm.
towards the toxic range. Now, the toxic didn't do anything bad to me, but I did lose the effects that I was seeking. And then I did become more tolerable to the product. So the next time I took it, I would have to take more.
Right.
So just like alcohol, as soon as you, and it takes a lot of discipline, but once you find that sweet spot, once you start finding or receiving the relief you're seeking, stop, let it ride out. And then you'll notice when it starts wearing off. And now you found, as you see on the chart, your sweet spot, your target range.
Yeah, by stop, what you mean is don't increase the amount of cannabis you're taking. More
Right.
is not better. What you want to do is you want to stay at that particular range. Again, you brought up a good analogy between alcohol and caffeine. I mean, every person's body is different. I know I have friends who can take one drink and they're done for the night, and other friends that drink the whole bottle and they're just getting started. Once you know what your relief, your therapeutic dosing relief area is, stick with that. You don't need to give yourself more of it. How do you know that? Listen to your body. I found that when I was going through this process, I was going through the process of feeling a little bit better. At first, I didn't feel any effects. Then I began to feel a little bit better, a little bit better, and then one day I just said, "Wow, this particular dose really is helping me out. I feel great." When I took a little bit more, as you mentioned, I wasn't getting that positive effect. It wasn't as effective as it was when I backed down. So that's where I knew this is my therapeutic dose level. And that's why I stick to that particular dose level to be able to address my particular condition. And I think that's really, really important. I think dosing is something that you really also should be journaling.
Absolutely. And we will hand those out. There, we have little journals in store, and there's also apps for that. But I also wanted to point out, Mark, because when you brought up the alcohol again, most people don't shop for alcohol by the alcohol percentage. Some people will say, I can't drink dark liquor, only light liquor, or vice versa. Some people are very strategic in what they drink. And the same thing goes for cannabis. You know, some cannabis will actually compound on your symptoms or what you're going through, whereas some will be perfectly fine and do exactly what you're looking for. And that's why that journaling is so important, because just like there's so many varieties of alcohol, there are so many varieties of cannabis and products and different routes of administration that you want to know what works for you, and you want, more importantly, want to remember that, so you could provide that information to somebody to help assist you as well.
Right. I can't emphasize more that, just make a note. But journaling, you're not writing a lot of material, just making a note. Took this much, felt great. Took this much, didn't feel good. Took this much, didn't get any effect. You'll see a pattern emerge. And again, listen to your body. I get a lot of questions of how much cannabis should I take in what quantities. I really can't tell you. This really has to do with your body. And fascinatingly enough, when I talk to a lot of physicians, when they say take 2 pills and call me in the morning, what they're doing is they're giving the lowest therapeutic recommended dose of that particular medication and finding out if it works for the patient. And in many cases, it doesn't. So the patient has to call a number of times to be able to to basically find their therapeutic dose for that particular pharma drug. And that's why a lot of the doctors the physicians have assistants to be able to do that. You have control. You can up the amount of product that you're using. You know when you're there, you know how to back off. That's what's important about cannabis is you're in control. You're not at the mercy of, let's say, doctors or people that really are hard to get a hold of and don't respond very quickly.
I'd also like to add, Mark, that for most persons who suffer from PTS, when an occurrence happens, sometimes we're able to mitigate or manage it by doing something we know will help calm us down or ease our troubles in that moment. If you ever reach that moment with using cannabis, the same thing applies. Try to find what your pastime is, reading a book, a game on your phone, talking to a spouse, whatever it may be, and you'll notice that it'll start to die down a little bit. It's your body reacting in a certain way that you can get acclimated to. And to date, there has not been a single overdose using medical marijuana or cannabis at all.
Yeah, I mean it's safe. You're not gonna die from. It's not like an opioid. It's not like a heroin or any narcotics. You can get off cannabis anytime you want. The issue is if you do that, you're going to probably bring back those symptoms. So people aren't necessarily addicted to cannabis. What they do is they use cannabis to be able to manage their lives, and I think that's a really important point. So, Manny, we've covered a lot of on medical cannabis. Do you want to give us any of, or and PTS? You want to give us your final thoughts?
Just that be aware, like you said, Mark, not everybody knows how to deal with it, but just about everybody does have a instance with PTS. It's about managing it. You're not alone. Try to find somebody to talk to. Medical marijuana is a great way to go. Talk to your physician. If you know loved ones, talk to a loved one, see how their experiences are going, or friends. And we're definitely here to reach out to if you need assistance.
Sure. And not only are our webinars done on a weekly basis a good source for information, also our YouTube channels are really a place that you can be able to get a lot of information about medical cannabis, PTS, as well as how to dose, what are routes of administration, and things like that. Manny, thank you much for joining us. And I hope each and every one of you who watch this was able to get something out of it. If we can just help one person get their life back by using medical cannabis, then we think we've been effective. And thank you very much for joining us.